Hello, Jesse.
Hello.
How are you?
Is there any weird echoing or reverb on my stuff?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's great, because there was with Angela's here for a minute, but I think it was mostly her phone or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
How are you?
Okay. I had a little problem with the power, but that's resolved now, so.
That's funny. Angela just had a power outage too, but you guys obviously aren't quite in the same situation.
Yeah, so she said that, yeah, she had a good talk with you.
Yeah, it was just a little chat, but you know.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So how are you settling in there?
I'm pretty good. Avery Anson just got in. Like literally just got off the taxi and we kind of got him settled here. So it's a busy time. Like it's been a very, I'm in quarantine still for another few more days, so it has been a lot going on. But I just have a lot of stuff going on in my life in general. So I had a little bit of time to get started working on updating the Cognition Futures website stuff. We'll talk about that more later. But I'm okay, and Anson's exhausted right now, but hopefully in the future we'll be able to, both be in the meetings for a little bit again. But things are going pretty well overall.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad your Anson's settling in there, and hopefully he does well there. So he's, yeah, that's great. Yeah, so welcome to the meeting. I know we had some, I guess we had a conversation a little bit about the Cognition Futures stuff, and we'll talk about that more this week. And then I want to review the Slack and go over some of the submissions just to make sure that we're on the, we're on the latest page on that. And then we'll go through some other things that we have to go. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Slack channel. And so if you're watching on YouTube, if you're on the Slack, we're going to go through each of the channels more or less sequentially. So there's my screen. Okay, so I don't know if, well, we'll just kind of go through the channels until we find new content here. I don't think there's any call for involvement. CGS group. Cognition Futures is probably the first one. So Cognition Futures, Jesse posted a couple of articles. This one here, which is this article on neuroscience of consciousness, deliberation period during easy and difficult decisions, re-examining Libet's veto window in a more ecologically valid framework. So this is ecological psychology, I take it. Jesse?
Can you... I missed which paper this was.
Oh, this was the one, re-examining Libet's veto window in a more ecologically valid framework.
Yeah, I didn't really get to deep dive into this paper, but I thought it'd be interesting to think about in terms of ecology and some developmental stuff, and yeah.
Yeah, we still have this theme of the ecological psychology versus everybody thing going on. So we'll talk more. I think I have some materials on that later, but all right, so that's that one. And then we go back to the Slack. There's this video, Models of Consciousness, Adam Safran, and this is just a video. I don't know, we'll go click through, but if you want to look at it. So this is our CogSci 2021 discussion group channel. So this is the Cognition Futures. So this is the update to the website. Might host things on Notion for the moment until I can fully upgrade the website for the event. So this is the one that you created, Jesse. So we're gonna have some updates, and then the page was updated. I saw.
That's not. Is that loading? Okay. There's more to be put there, but this is a very brief update, and we can put a whole section in for. I'm kind of in between, like, sorting out different. I might just use this website on Notion because it's a little bit easier to manage, but also, I don't know. I may do a bigger upgrade to, like, the GitHub stuff, but I may not. So we'll see. But there will be a lot more things going on that page in the next week or two.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're interested in seeing how things are developing, go to this site here. I don't think we have anything new in these other channels. FAI, I thought I saw a couple things this week. Yeah, so we had, let's see. Okay, so this was embodiment related. This paper in Science, newly detailed nerve links between brain and other organs shape thoughts, memories, and feelings. So this is about interoception. This is where your brain, so it's like this, where your brain is controlling sort of joints and, nerves and, the area around your bones and things like that. So the vagus nerve forms a complex network linking the brain and internal organs. So this is the idea that this interoception, this it's like, proprioception or other sensory systems, but it's internal to the body, how this might shape thoughts, memories, and feelings. And so this is a fairly old idea. It goes back to Wilder Penfield, who was one of the pioneers of EEG. And they were doing a lot of things with looking at how the nerves and other things are, connected to the brain and how those things work together. So, and these things actually play a role in things like the insula and in other areas where emotions are processed. So, Penfield then ventured into more mysterious territory when he probed the insula, a deep fold of the cortex. Some patients felt nauseous or gassy, others belched or vomited. My stomach is upset and I smell something like medicine. So they could do things with participants in experiments that we couldn't really get away with today. So, but they were doing this, I think, in a medical college. But they were basically trying to figure out some of these relationships between the body and the brain. And, at that time, they were just kind of poking it with a stick. But now people are doing, better explorations of this. They're kind of looking at things like the vagus nerve, which is a large network of fibers that goes through the different organs of the body and then coming back to the brainstem and then routing into some of the other areas of the brain. So this is, again, this is the vagus nerve coming from a mouse's brain. It doesn't come out like this, but it goes into different parts of the internal milieu, as they say. In one of the original meanings of homeostasis was, or one of the original ideas behind homeostasis is that it regulates the internal milieu. So this is the internal milieu, all these organs and blood vessels that this interoceptive system is innervating. And so it's taking information and sending it to the brain where it's having some effect. We don't really know yet all the details of that, but that's basically what we have. And I think this is an interesting paper in terms of like embodiment, but also in terms of kind of like thinking about even cognitive offloading, which is something that we have coming up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We have that abstract that was accepted, and we offload. We think of offloading as sending information out into the environment or leveraging information in the environment, but it could be that you're offloading cognition to different parts of the body as well. So that's that paper. Then there was this Crowdcast on subcortical cortical loops and sensory processing and perception. So these are loops in the brain that go between the different parts of cortex. So that was a Crowdcast event that's always recorded. So if you missed it, you can just click on that and register and get in. And then there was another Crowdcast here. This was actually an event on evolving neural networks. This is something I found, and the link didn't come through on this, but you just click through to this website and it'll send you to the Crowdcast. It had a number of interesting talks. So it was actually a lot about evolutionary neuroscience, but it also had some people doing work on evolving neural networks. So the idea was that, the discoveries done by the evolutionary developmental biology field has helped us understand this aspect of shaping neural circuits. The goal of this workshop is to bring together experts in systems and computational neuroscience, machine learning, in the Evo-Devo field. So they had a number of people here. We had some pretty interesting talks. Paul Cizek was there. Ida from Neuromatch was there. Tony Zador was there. So this is a nice, they have Michael Levin paper here, Reframing Cognition, Getting Down to Biological Basics. There's a new special issue, and I don't know if this link will work. Okay, there's a new issue of Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B with a number of similar papers in it. So this one is about reframing cognition. This actually might be the one that they published earlier on basal cognition. There's another special issue, and I don't know if this isn't in it, but there's another issue on basal cognition as well. But we'll talk about that maybe next week. In any case, that's one of the papers. Another paper here is Luis Puelas, a developmental ontology for the mammalian brain based on a prosomeric model. And so that's another potentially interesting paper. And then this is, of course, the paper we reviewed, Resynthesizing Behavior Through Phylogenetic Refinement. This one here, Learning Structures, Predictive Representations, Replay and Generalization. That was Ida, one of her papers. So yeah, there are a bunch of, and then this paper on Critique of Pure Learning. So there was a number of interesting papers there, a number of interesting talks.
Yeah, that looks really cool. I didn't get to look at this. I'll have to take a look at that. Could you actually scroll down to the bottom of the page again?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Just the speakers. I wanted to see. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, I saw the link, but I didn't get to go through it. This looks really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, and again, this is on Crowdcast, so you can just basically go to the link, register, and you can watch the recording. So I'll put that in the chat. Okay, so that was this last week, and then there's this publication that Jesse found from DeepMind, Making Sense of Sensory Input. And I don't know if we covered this in a meeting or if this is something that I retweeted or what. Or maybe put in the Slack at some point. So this is DeepMind, of course. They're doing, their goal is to go towards the artificial intelligence side of it. So this paper attempts to answer a central question in unsupervised learning. What does it mean to make sense of a sensory sequence? So this sounds almost like it's very ecologically psychology, an ecological psychology point of view here, where they're trying to figure out, but of course they're not doing that. They're doing like an artificial intelligence type thing. So what they're trying to do is they kind of think of this sensory input or direct sensation as a form of unsupervised learning, and so that's that part. And then making sense of sensory input is a type of program synthesis, but it is an unsupervised program synthesis. So, I don't know if that's if that's something that jogs something in your memory, or if it leads to a flash of brilliance. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about it in that way, but I don't know. They do this, and they have a computer implementation called the Apperception Engine that was designed to satisfy the above requirements. Excuse me. Our system is able to produce interpretable human-readable causal theories from very small amounts of data because of the strong inductive bias provided by the Kantian unity constraints. You have to read the paper to know what those are. So, a causal theory produced by our system is able to predict future sensor readings as well as retrodict earlier readings, which means kind of go back, not predict, but retrodict from the past, and then impute missing sensory readings. So basically they're taking information coming in, it's this direct perception, and then they're able to use what's already in the system to fill in. So they have this framework. It's not supervised, but it's like a framework of data that's already in the system. So, if you think about it like sort of a combination of direct perception and kind of a Bayesian filter, where you have these priors that you're building from what you've encountered, and then it's filling in the gaps. And that's basically what they're doing. So they test the engine in a diverse variety of domains, including cellular automata, rhythms, and simple nursery tunes, so like music, multimodal binding problems, which involve sort of how the brain sort of binds together percepts. So we haven't talked about the binding problem, but it's this idea that you have all these percepts coming in, auditory streams, visual streams, and your brain has to bind them together into a common percept. It's not automatic. And you can decouple them, and you can forget the different aspects of them. You can have different parts of them missing. But the percepts have to be bound together to really be like these, strong sort of sensory experiences. And so that's a very important problem when it comes to like consciousness or multisensory perception. And so a lot of people have explored the binding problem using EEG and looking at EEG signals that are related to this. And so, it's a problem. It's hard. It's not quite like as hard as consciousness, but it's hard to kind of get good measures of. So it's interesting that they're trying to approach it from an artificial intelligence perspective. So then they also have occlusion tasks and sequence induction IQ tests. In each domain, we test our engine's ability to predict future sensor values, retrodict. We talked about that. So basically, their engine performs well in all domains. This is notable, I guess. We note in particular that in the sequence induction IQ tasks, our system achieved human-level performance. This is notable because our system is not a bespoke system designed specifically to solve IQ tasks, but a general-purpose perception system that was designed to make sense of any sensory sequence. So they're saying that it can solve these tasks, and I guess IQ tasks means they're like puzzles or some sort of abstract, problem space. And then the idea is that the machine isn't designed for that. That there's some sort of task there's a transfer there, transfer learning going on. There's also, the ability to do things at a very general level. So, they're kind of getting this general intelligence based on this thing that they're trying to do that isn't really, the goal isn't general intelligence, but they're getting general intelligence out of it. So I think, it's an interesting paper. I'm not sure, like I said, it's one of those things maybe we can think about, and maybe it relates to the Gibsonian information stuff that we're doing, but I'm not sure exactly how. But yeah, it's an interesting paper. Thanks, Jesse. Okay, so I think Ethics, Tech, and Society might have something in it. I think this was Aaron from Monday. Actually, there was something, that was from Friday. So this is this Montreal Ethics Recognition of Work in AI. So this is, this is Community Nomination Form, State of AI Ethics, July 2021 Report, Volume 5. So they're inviting the AI ethics community to nominate researchers, practitioners, advocates, and community members in the domain of AI ethics to be featured in their upcoming State of the AI Ethics Report. So basically they want to highlight different types of work. So I don't know if this is appropriate for ethics and society, and we could maybe put it in, see if they think it's suitable.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that yet. And the other news for the Ethics Society team is, I think Aaron and Angela might make a Discord discussion, because it seems like people are having a little easier time to use that. So that isn't fully set up yet, but actually just in talking to Angela now, that might be something that happens. So there's a lot going on there. I know Aaron's busy with some job stuff, but Angela's kind of settling into different things, or she is. But once I kind of settle down and get back in the driver's seat about it, there's going to be some stuff to be going on there for sure.
Yeah, that sounds great. So let's see. And then she had something else in here. It was Montreal AI Ethics Institute is inviting the AI ethics community. Nomination forms here. There is often great work being done in different parts of the world that does not get the attention it deserves due to the state of our information ecosystem and the manner in which platforms surface content. We would like to break that mold and shed some light on valuable work being done by talented people. So this is a community. We don't accept self-nominations. This is meant to be a community recognition effort, so we would have to submit, another group's work, which is fine. I don't know who, people have ideas. I know people read about different areas of the literature, so that's something that if you find someone who should be recognized, you can nominate them. So that's good. Let's see. I don't think there's anything there. Events, news, external conversations, general channel doesn't have anything in it really.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot more this week.
These are just the updates from our stand-up.
That picture was a week ago today. It's hard to believe.
That's Jesse on the train. I don't think we have anything else in here. Yeah, so that's all for that. So did you have anything to add, Jesse, on Slack or anything else?
Not particularly. I am I guess another update is I'm doing more with the startup that I joined. It's it's coming a little more public about it. The state-of-the-art AI, which is kind of spiritually aligned with the cognition futures mapping projects. I'm looking to kind of help develop some of their plans. I'm involved in the strategic initiatives for the group and some community outreach and things like that. And there's some overlap between this, cognition future stuff and some of the things in the lab in general, like sort of an applied epistemological directory in a very particular way of visualizing some of the citations and part of the spirit of the group is open source based and creating open source resources for AI research. So that's been, I'm not really sure how to address those updates, but that's been something that I've been tending to, and there's some collaboration related opportunities that may be upcoming about that, but that's most of my updates. Between that and a sort of adjacent update is I'm also involved with a group that's looking at biometric data acquisition and related sort of resources, but also there's some overlap into things like affective computing and interpretation of moods and physiological states and other things through different monitors and sensors and whatever else, and to some extent the machine learning behind that, although I'm not really dealing with that right now, but potentially down the road. And as I kind of alluded to, I'll just mention this again here, it's very likely that in the future I may be making a bit of a pivot towards really exploring embodiment and cognition and the interpretation and quantification and interface between states, physical states that humans have in their physical embodiment, and how that relates to digital or virtual or augmented reality stuff. I think that's, I mention this I guess somewhat frequently now, but I mention this in the context of where some of the long-term trends of long-term nexus points of stuff that I seem to be looking into and feeling out, and potentially even do graduate work in when time comes, which is interesting because I haven't. This would be a very specific kind of application for a lot of the things that we're looking at, and what I'm definitely doing in the meantime is starting to just look at what's out there and a lot of how a lot of almost in a hardware sense, but like how things are being interpreted and who's doing what. And I'll be getting a really deep dive in the field of how some of this information is being collected, and it's not so much the theory and the science yet behind it, but that's pretty adjacent. So I don't know. I'm just gonna mention that here as like some of my adjacent updates and things that I'm doing, and it may take a little bit of time. Like right now, there's kind of the current wave, a really honestly fruitful wave of like cognition futures related stuff and embodiment stuff that's come across the lab this year, and that's actually really cool to see. And I think that will carry. I haven't been putting as much work into that the last month or so because of obvious reasons, but I feel like there may be a blending of these things later on, or like into next year particularly. So that's just my sort of ground view and then overview update of what I like. That's like my outlook from what I'm seeing right now. And so that's kind of like my stuff. That's the cognition future related stuff. And then there's Anusha. I don't think she'll be here today either. Anusha's actually, everybody's traveling right now.
Right.
I think Anusha's visiting the West Coast, but she did confirm her interest in helping out with the discussion group, and I know she's very interested in child psychology, developmental psychology, and things like that. And I kind of want to just get her set up. Obviously, the critical periods thing, but that's been a little bit inactive last week. But for the discussion group, I can see her being. I kind of want to give her like a little bit of ownership over part of stuff for that arena, and see what she can do with it. So that's kind of that side of things, and then the ethics team, has been is looking for some structure and guidance, and I will be able to provide that more soon. Again, let's see, but yeah, that's kind of my update. And I guess the only thing I would say about the discussion group, just to kind of mention this here, I kind of said this last week, but it was impossible to really talk on the train. I'm kind of starting to break down, and I want to talk about this with you and arrange some things. And Anson isn't really up to speed yet with all of that yet, but we have a lot of time, and I just want to think about I'm not gonna try to be like encyclopedia about everything, but like what are some trajectories that we want to focus on, or what are some segments that we want to have? How do we want to have this be like? There's like some installments that I think we can do about like some computational stuff, or focus on critical periods, or focus on development, or anything like lab adjacent that we want to like specifically feature, and we can break that up with like a panel or a discussion. And I may try to look and see if anybody. I haven't done this yet, but see if anybody at CogSci would like to, speak or offer insight, at least regarding our discussion group. I don't really know. I have to reach out to people more about that. But that's kind of what comes to my mind about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my update mostly.
Well, good. Yeah. It's for the Cog Futures, cognitive trajectory stuff. I don't know how you get in touch with people who are going to be at the conference. That might be. There was a contact person who we were. I don't think they would know though. There was a contact person that was setting up things with the conference, but I think they're from a conference company, so I don't think that they're going to be helpful. I was thinking more along the lines of if there was like a way to know who's at the conference. I don't think there's like a directory of registered people, but there are people who maybe like are big names who you might have read. You think, well, they might be at the conference, and you might send them an email and see if they're, or a message, and see if they're going to be there, if they're interested in attending. Well, they don't really have to attend the CogSci conference to do this, because we can just invite them externally. But I think that's good. You can just kind of think about who might be really suitable for this and just ask them if they want to participate. But the other thing is, what trajectories do we want to cover? So there are some things we know that we've talked about in the group, like there are things in AI. There are things in like computational areas that we've talked about. And so it's just a matter of taking those areas and just kind of putting the flesh on the bones, so to speak, like finding references. If we want to approach it like as a series of references and like highlight those, or to have like, something more along the lines of ideas that are raised by those references. So like, it could be landmark papers, or it could be the ideas that are in those papers and how they connect. And we'd have to like kind of say that this is how you draw a trajectory. It could be that you have like a paper. Actually, let me switch to my board because I don't get to use this enough. Oh, is there someone else here?
Nope, that was just a sound here.
Okay. Let me see if I can do this. All right. So let me switch to my Jamboard here. So we can have like individual papers that are sort of connected over time or by topic. So these can be papers. Where we can have ideas that link together. And we'd have to define what an idea is. So we could think of this as more like sort of an epistemological way of thinking about it, and this is more of a literature-based way of thinking about it. And then we also have these debates. So we've talked about a number of these debates in the meetings. There's this, like there was the Bayesian versus the cybernetics, or cybernetics versus connectionism. So,
Yeah, I think that'd be something really cool to bring up there.
Right.
That's a good idea for that one.
And then they're even like, we have ecological psych, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, versus something like interface theory, which is not a mainstream theory. But, these are like different theories that are kind of competing. And then you say, well, why, what's the motivation for this debate? And I notice in a lot of the cog-sci literature, you have these debates where you have two ideas. So basically, from this standpoint, you have two different trajectories of ideas. And the idea is that there's a reference. So it would be something like this, where you'd have like two different trajectories of ideas. Right, they're building up. And then there's this debate. And it doesn't necessarily solve anything. And it's maybe not even like, it may not even be dialectical, because you have this, they still continue on their trajectories, but you do have this interaction between the ideas, and people can evaluate them here. So you just have these ideas. And by dialectic, I mean like you have two ideas and they duke it out, and then then the thing that results from that is stronger than the things that were previous to it. But that's not really what you get. You just get these things that just continue on, but they're maybe strengthened by this interaction, where people kind of view the subsequent idea streams as, or the different trajectories in different ways. So in that sense, you also have this sort of like external view of the trajectory, right? And then, so this external view of the trajectory would be like people looking at this trajectory from outside versus people just writing the papers, and people who are kind of like the true believers. So, again, you have the ecological psychology people who might be, devoted to the stream of thought, and they know the area very well. And when these debates arise, they say, well, of course ecological psychology is superior, and here's why. And then you have, again, with interface theory of the same thing, you have people who are, true believers, and they have like a sort of, they know the literature and that's their home. And they'll say, well, yeah, I know that that interface theory is better. But then, you have people who are viewing this debate for the first time, and they're maybe getting their introduction to both of these ideas through the debate. And so they don't, maybe they go to one camp or another, or maybe they, just kind of like figure out how to synthesize them from that interaction. But that's the way I think maybe we can view some of these trajectories. I think it's important to make this sort of typology of trajectories. So we have these different, what kind of different trajectories can we make? So we can just have like a group of papers. We can take the papers themselves. It's like a stream of coherent thought, right? They're landmark things in papers, landmark papers. Then there are these ideas that come out of the papers, and which could be like, some idea that's developed in one paper continues on in another paper, but there's something added to it. And then, another idea maybe that emerges that's slightly different. So, all these things can be like kind of understood as a sort of an epistemological progress, if you will. And then you have these debates where you have these two trajectories that sort of intersect here with a debate. And then people are either like sticking to their guns, maybe they change their mind, I don't know, or they view it externally and say, how can we synthesize these ideas?
Yeah, this is really good. I think this is a really, I think this is a nice maybe lens to view what we can discuss and what's going on. I think this is a good way to do it. And if it's, I like what you said, like epistemological path or something. I think that was good.
Yeah.
As well. And I kind of want to like. I have to do it. I think you're kind of going there. I kind of want to get Anusha particularly on board with it. Anson is versed in some of it already, but I don't know what he's going to be able to do. But like just like we need to spend a little bit of time refamiliarizing ourselves with what these current debates are in those areas. And what, because I know some of them, but like I don't really know, I want to start listing them out. Also, like you said, typology of trajectories. I think that's also like a key thing that I'll note. Let's see here.
And then if that presentation that we did for the Cultural Evolution Conference,
Yes.
I think there's some stuff in there about like different ways of thinking about the evolution of trajectories. So like, you have, for example, different patterns of sort of branching and, coming together. So like these trajectories will branch off. You'll have like maybe one paper that introduces a couple of ideas, or like an idea that has two different sort of paths to take. And then, you have that, so you have that branching, and then you maybe have something that comes back together where, you may have a couple of candidates and they say, well, they're really all kind of the same idea. Sometimes you'll have papers where people say, they sort of synthesize the literature, and they say, it's often maybe like a literature review, and they'll say, these are all basically the same idea. So they'll come back together in a unified way. The trick is here, I think, is maybe we should focus some on sort of the abstract nature of it, and then some on some of the literature. I'm not really sure how much, we can throw a bunch of papers at people, but, maybe like to introduce a framework and then introduce some papers that sort of show how this plays out in the literature. So like, if we take a paper and we say there are a bunch of papers or there are some debates, we can list a couple of the debates, kind of go over maybe the papers in it, the ideas, and then maybe the external view. I don't know if we can get a handle on the external view, but how would we get a handle on the external view? Is it something that we can look at, like, something like Reddit or Twitter, where people discuss these things? Or is that, is it like, do people have responses? I know in the Behavioral and Brain Sciences journal, they have the paper, the main paper, and then they have proliferation of different responses that people give to the paper. So like, some papers have like, 10 responses to them in different ways. And so that's another way to get like a handle on the discussion, is to get go to Behavioral and Brain Sciences journal and just go to some of their papers on topics and look at there's like going to be like this really long set of rebuttals, and they're usually like a page a piece, and those rebuttals will give you like some idea what people are thinking. So you might have a paper, say, on ecological psychology, and then the rebuttals will range from like saying that it's a bad idea to saying that there's some other group of papers that you need to cite, to some tangent on robotics. There are all sorts of things you'll find. And so the trick is to I think that's a good model, because that really lays out a lot of the different strands from a single source. So I guess I'll go back to the papers. I don't think we need to really do a really heavy, exhaustive literature search for this session.
Yes.
I think we just need to bring in some examples. And so that could be, just a smattering of examples to give people a taste of what this is. And then, if we give them the framework, we give them some paper examples, we give them some debates, some, how people do this, then they can maybe apply it to their own domain, where they have they're talking about some really niche thing that we don't know anything about, and they say, wait a minute, they're doing this sort of thing in our field, and maybe it's worth rethinking our field from that standpoint of I never thought of the sort of the intellectual trajectory of it before.
Yep, that's good. That's what I was kind of hoping for myself.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So, we should get Anson involved in this conversation a bit more. Trying to think of what else we need. We need to maybe get some people recruited, some participants. We can start advertising this session on social media. Maybe, I don't know how many people we're going to get from the actual conference. We'll probably get a fair number of people. I don't know how it's being promoted internally, but there may also be in the conference, they may also offer opportunities for people to message. I know that there are a couple of conferences I've attended that have apps for the conference, which I don't know how useful they are, but they can be to get in touch with people at the conference. I don't know what Coxeye is doing, but just make sure that you and Anson register for the conference.
I meant to do that, and then my travel stuff happened. I may also reach out to, I'm thinking of reaching out to, I don't know if I should call him a friend, not really a colleague yet, but academic acquaintance / friend, Eric Leonardis. He's pretty versed. He's a cognitive science PhD, about to graduate from San Diego, and he is into cybernetics and stuff, and I might ask him for some advice on this. So, or even he might even be there for just perspective. So I think I'm going to reach out to him about this. And what is the date of this event? Late July?
Yeah, it's the 29th, I believe.
That'll be good for me. Okay. I'll reach out to Eric. Anybody else that comes to mind? And see if there's probably a few other people who are I know Eric's versed in cognitive science society, the conference in general. So I think he actually ran one of these last year. Now that I think about it. So Everything is good, and I'll have to reach out to him. I keep forgetting to take. I've been using Otter.ai for note taking, and I forgot to. Everything we just said would have been really good to have on that. Let me just go back and listen to it again, but still, that's been good and useful. But yeah, I'll reach out to Eric. I really like the map stuff that we talked about. I think maybe we can discuss that in Slack, or putting that into like a Word document for like a plan, like almost like a recipe plan, like a plan for the thing would be good. I might be able to do that now. If you want to do that, you can. But one of us, I can do it maybe after the meeting or in a few minutes once I get full access to my computer. We should have a document to just like put this on the paper again. Because that was really good. I think that was a very good planning session about that, and there's the lovelies to follow up on, and some ideas for like where to plug in, like Anusha and Anson and things that we can do to kind of put the skin and the meat on the bones, as you said.
Yeah, and again, like I don't think we need to overdo it. We just need to have some, a couple of examples of things. So we need to have like a little bit of a sort of framework, a little bit of like some examples, not too deeply because we have 90 minutes, and then we want to like make discussion, or maybe like have like an idea where we say, well, how does this apply to your field? Well, that might be a little open-ended, but we need to make it like accessible and quick. Hit the points, and then 90 minutes will be over before you know it. So it's not like we can do like an hour-long thing on just this, and it's challenging, but I think we can do it. And it's it's one of those things like once you get into it, it's going to be. I think it's going to, if we do it right, it's going to elicit a lot of thought and conversation. So hopefully there's we can pull together some of this, and I'll put the Jamboard image up in Slack so we can like have a visual of it. But yeah, we should pull together a lot of, and I'll get some of the more salient slides out of that Cultural Evolution Society talk too, just to give us an idea of what the visuals look like. I think a lot of strong visuals will help too.
Yeah.
Draw them out and present them as slides and say this is like the way a trajectory works in theory, and then we can put some papers on that or some ideas, and then it's like and then say, well, this is a theory. You could have it a much more complex method for doing this, or more complex analysis. Because it's really an analysis of the literature at some level, because you're just taking like papers, you're saying, if people don't lay it out like this, it's sort of obvious maybe to people if you tell them that, they say, yeah, it's a literature review. But you're like, yes, but you're not analyzing it in a way that is useful to see the connections. Like, literature reviews, you just review a bunch of papers, you kind of build a narrative. But the problem is that the narrative is not, it's not systematic in the sense that, like, if you were to say, okay, here's a trajectory, here's a debate, here's how people viewed that debate, here's a paper in, like, BBS, here's how people viewed that paper, which is almost like a debate, but they just kind of present an idea. Then we can get a handle on, like, the way things have kind of moved through time, how people have debated these ideas, and then sort of the public feedback. So how does the field respond to this? Is it, that there's this hard, like, kind of resistance to the idea? Is it like something that people can draw, parallels to other, like, if I talk about something in human behavior, are there animal behaviors to say, oh yeah, that's a great idea? We don't have anything like that in animal behavior. Stuff like that. So it's it's just something we're going to have to get some key papers on and kind of discuss how to arrange that how to extract the information out of it, and so that's another challenge too. But all these things, I think these are good, and I think it's also good to kind of mention that part of it too in the session, like that there's this sort of that you have to extract information out of literature to get this, because other people will ask, well, this is great, but how do I do this at home in my own field? So we want to kind of give them somewhat of a recipe for that.
Yeah, that would be a really good way to like offer. Like, I know you mentioned some different like frameworks and typologies in other senses, but even just offering like, hey, it's sort of like, it kind of always goes back to the CSV stuff and talking about epistemological directories and how to do that, and like the original frontier map concept of how you're going to map a frontier.
Yeah.
And maybe just having a little. I mean, that could even be like a big chunk of it if we wanted to, but we have so much stuff to cover. We could do like a session, that could easily be like 20 minutes or half an hour just on that topic alone. Just like here's some tools or lenses to use in that process. I don't think it needs to be that long, but like it could very easily just be that would be. I could see that actually being like critical importance enough to the sense we'd have to actually choose, like, all right, how much do we want to center this topic, this I don't know, theme or topic, because like that may be one of the most interesting things, and it will be kind of I think it'll be quite useful because it's a way of talking about the debate. It's sort of content agnostic, or like it's more about how to navigate the trajectories than what are the trajectories themselves, and I think that might be a very cool thing to bring to the discussion group itself.
Yeah, it's great. I think that's a good. Okay, so we've discussed this a little bit. Hopefully, this helps us get some of this together. And again, you need to bring Anson and probably Anusha into the loop on this, maybe in the next meeting or two, or if we need to discuss this on Slack, that's fine too. But yeah, hopefully we'll have a good session. Okay, so is there anything else you wanted to mention?
Regarding this topic specifically, I think we covered a lot of it. I definitely feel like I want to go back, and this segment of the video is going to be really important because there's a lot of stuff to just mine from what we talked about, and again, putting these we need to put these ideas onto the Word document, and then kind of, I want to be able to show that to Anson and Anusha. And one other thing, actually, that I just thought of, I know Aaron isn't necessarily doing stuff in this area. However, I don't know how she'll respond to this, but I may sort of recruit her because she might be interested in doing some like data analytics, or like maybe part of a bibliometric study and using data or statistical analysis on them, just to kind of give a little bit of a quantitative approach to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just had that idea thinking about all this stuff and thinking about a recent conversation I had with her. So that might be something she wanted to do. We could maybe offer a little bit in that as part of things too. I don't know. But outside of that, I think this is good. I'm glad to hear it, and I want to start putting it on paper in a more get a structure to it. And I think I appreciate you kind of been holding it together, and I want to kind of now start constructing it. So I think we're in good shape to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thanks for the discussion on that. Yeah, I'm glad we could get that put together. Let's see. I wanted to highlight the medium here. So I don't know if we saw this. Let me share my screen again. I don't know if people saw this. I didn't really talk about. Well, I think I put it up last week. I don't know if we talked about this. No, it was after last week. So this is the new post for our medium. I did another recent Saturday morning NeuroSim conversations. So this is the last several weeks of meetings. We have some discussions that, if people missed them or if people wanted to get the highlights, they can do so here. So we had an ethics, tech, and society discussion on May 15th. We had a tight feedback loops and learning and the mean and versus out of distribution behaviors discussion, also on May 15th. Okay, then we had the June 5th conversation about trajectories. We had, here are the coverage of the two debates. So this is the ecological psychology debates. We had the papers for them, but we also had the the session or the section where we kind of talked a little bit about it in the meetings, June 6th and June 12th. So one was ecological psychology versus interface theory. This was this paper by Andrew Wilson, interface theory versus Gibson. And then there's this other one, it's like ecological psychology versus enactivism. That was the Baggs and Camaro paper on radical embodiment in two directions. So then Anusha did the critical periods presentation. I did a presentation on human-assisted AI and intelligence augmentation. And that might be a good place to go. I don't know if I put a lot in there about it, but that's a good segue into the stuff that you were talking about, Jesse, about the sort of the psychophysiology and the virtual reality interest that you have. I don't know how much. I think I just hit the tip of the iceberg with this talk, but we can talk more about this in future weeks. I think that's a good fertile area to talk about. The models that exist are, well, there hasn't been a lot of theory in this area, for one thing. So there's the possibility of sort of coming up with good models for what's going on with respect to like the psychophysiology of people during this real-time behavior that you'll often see in virtual environments and augmented environments. So, there are these, when you're interacting with things, the question is it fundamentally different from something you would see in the real world? And the answer is probably yes. The second question is can we sort of get a handle on, can we shape behavior basically using these kind of environments? And the answer is maybe, but we have to have a good model for it. And so this intelligence augmentation area I think is particularly useful for that because it allows you to, and the term intelligence is maybe problematic a bit or imprecise because we don't, it could be intelligence, it could just be some cognitive function. It's not, it's the way that, say, Ashby, for example, thought about it was in terms of a general intelligence, but, we can think about it in terms of like attentional capacity or, spatial cognition ability or something like that. So there's a lot more to talk about there. This thing on intransitivity that I mentioned, I think it was 2 weeks ago. And then here's our group here in one of our discussions. And then here's, if you'd like to join the conversation, join our Slack, etc. So, so just check out the links on this if you're so inclined. Now I'd like to move on to the submissions. So make sure that we're on board with this or up to speed. We had, I don't think we have anything that's outstanding on the list for once. I think we're caught up. This Gibsonian information abstract was submitted to the International Society for the Study of Information. So this is BICA conference. It was submitted day of the deadline, I had to submit it to someone's email. I had to like figure out where to submit it. I had to read through it a couple times, and I found the email. So I sent this abstract by email. It's basically the abstract we talked about in the meeting last week. I addressed the comments that were in it, and then I sent it off. So hopefully, we'll get something out of that. And that'll be maybe a presentation, and maybe we can take the paper that we already have, modified a bit, and then submit it either there or somewhere else. So that's for that. And then this cognitive offloading session, this developmental model of offloading. So this is something that, of course, was accepted. I think we talked about it last week. That was accepted, and it's a 15-minute talk. And Angela and Jesse and myself are on it. And then the conference is July 15th through 16th. So this is something we'll be working on the next couple weeks. Again, it's this sort of developmental model of offloading. It's this, notion of in development, you have things that are getting, you have a nervous system that's sort of developing and being built up. So, decisions have to be made by the nervous system, and it's not, an autonomous thing, but it's basically, do things get offloaded into the environment? Do they get offloaded to different parts of the body? Or is it kept in the brain? So you can look at brain size, you can look at what kind of strategies are going on for cognitive processing. Maybe some organisms are putting a lot of their investment in getting information from the environment. Maybe they're keeping big brains because they need all the processing power. One interesting way to look at this is through the idea of trade-offs, which is this idea that in evolution and development, there are these trade-offs that you make when when you have competing objectives. So for example, if you need to conserve energy, if you're an organism that is in a situation where you don't really use a big brain, you don't really need a lot of representational capacity in your brain, say, you're just kind of living in a very you're not moving around a lot, you're just kind of living in an environment where there's not a lot of variation, you don't need to process information that much, you don't need a big brain, and so you don't invest in that in a large brain because you don't want to spend the metabolic budget on that. You want to spend it on other things, and so you don't have a big brain. Now, that may mean that if you need more intelligent capacity, maybe later in the lineage, or maybe later in life for some reason, you actually have a lot of that capacity offloaded to the environment. Sometimes by default, or sometimes it's just something that you can, that's the only place you can get it from. So there's a lot of, I'm kind of shuffling around with my thoughts a bit on that, but I think, there's that interesting relationship between trade-offs and offloading. There's also some, relationship between ontogeny and offloading, which is in the literature as well. I've gotten some papers that we might add to it. So, this is an interesting area. So I'll be putting together some cursory slides on this, and then we'll talk about it in Slack or maybe next week. So I think that's it for the submissions. I don't think there's anything on the list. Jesse, can you think of anything we need to put on the list? Anything upcoming or anything to follow up on?
All right, I was muted here. I might put it's not really a submission, but kind of a deadline of like volunteer applications for things like NeuroIPS should be on the list, or that stuff. I don't think there's going to be a conference aspect of things, but also maybe just putting Neuromatch Academy on there. There's I feel like there are some conferences that the short answer is no, but I feel like there's stuff in my mind that I don't remember the details for that need to be on there. But I don't have anything else to really add.
Right. Yeah, these deadlines are often sneak up. So I mean, like even for volunteer applications, that would be good to keep on here. The enemy, Neuromatch Academy, they're kind of getting organized here. So we have the academy, and then we have I'm going to be a mentor, and you're going to be attending the academy, and so I mean I don't know what kinds of activities are going to surround that. Last year we kind of did this thing where we did the intro. Yeah. Like
did you mention for deep learning or for the other one?
I think for the other one. I just filled out an application. I haven't gotten like an assignment yet, but I'm going to be a mentor. It's not defined yet as to what, but I'm pretty sure. I don't think deep learning. Yeah, I'm not. I'm more comfortable doing the other one. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
But yeah, so I mean that's the other thing is we have all these things surrounding Neuromatch Academy. Like we have the prep sessions which we did last year. I don't know how effective that was, but if we maybe want to do some focus on that in the meetings or something, we can do that. And then definitely during the academy we can do discussions on some of the topics. And then we have all those presentations from last summer that are still there. So I don't know if that's something that is like a sort of a supplemental thing that people are interested in or not. We kind of went through last year and we did this sort of, I did a lot of lectures on things, and we had a lot of people interested in talking about these topics that were hot topics at the time. And then, we did the project on cybernetics or on feedback loops, which would be cybernetic adjacent. And so all those things kind of happened, and we didn't really follow up too much on it because, it just happens that you don't, if you're not being forced by the event. So there are a lot of things that I don't know if they can be put on this list, but they're definitely things to think about more and to sort of how do we use those resources.
Yeah.
So that's good. We'll come back to this in subsequent weeks. Now I wanted to get into the papers folder, which I have a lot of stuff in, apparently. I've been going through some of the stuff see this Trajectories folder and the interface theory folder. I want to go through these. Oh, Angela had a comment on Slack the other day, and she told me not to quote her directly on this, so I won't. But I will bring it up. Angela said something about for trajectories in cognitive science, which I'm interested in, it reminds me of the dark horse research mentioned in Range, which is this book here. It says Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, and this is David Epstein, who is a sort of a journalist slash bestseller writer. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a little promotion for the book here. I loved Range. And so this is the book that's from the top of the field were the oddball trajectories. So the people who reached the top of their fields had these oddball trajectories. And they said that their pathway was very different compared to their peers. But most successful people had the same sort of oddball trajectory. So the idea was that these people were very successful. They didn't take a common path through the field. They took this sort of oddball trajectory. And so I guess it relates to the generalization or specialization of their sort of worldview. And so I think that's an interesting point. It kind of relates to the thing we're doing with trajectories in the sense that, if you think about different, personalities, but maybe more appropriately papers that come out, some of them are very focused on a specific question, But some of the ones that really set the agenda for trajectories are the papers that are a bit broader, where they have this sort of quality where they are more speculative, and they don't really focus on a tiny area. They're kind of like, here's this idea, and then they kind of, it's a lot of the nature papers tend to be like that, where they're sort of, they set this very provocative tone, and then they go in and, they might be very rigorous or they might not be, but it's like, yeah, this is the way we should think about things. And so this is an interesting point. I don't know where else to take that right now, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so, that's that one. And then the interface theory is, so this is interface theory. I wanted to get some papers on it so that we understand what it is. And this is a paper, or this is an idea by Donald Hoffman, who is a cognitive scientist who's done a lot of work on virtual environments. And so he's done a lot of work in virtual reality. And so the interface theory of perception, this is one of the papers that he's published on it. The subtitle is Natural Selection Drives True Perception to Swift Extinction. And so the idea is that you have this sort of, that sort of perception is sort of an interface between your brain and the world. So the idea is that you have this sort of mental representation that you use, and it interprets the sensory world. So instead of like direct perception, you're dealing with some sort of representation of the world, the sensory world. And so a lot of what you see isn't really there. It's like this internal interpretation of what's out in the environment. So a goal for perception is to estimate true properties of the world. The goal for categorization is to classify its structure. And so evolution has shaped our senses to this end. These three assumptions motivate much of the work on human perception. I here argue on evolutionary grounds that all three are false. Instead, our perceptions constitute a species-specific user interface that guides behavior in a niche. So, our niche, whatever that is, and we're actually very general, but we have these mental representations that sort of interpret the sensory world in a certain way. Just as the icons of a PC's interface hide the complexity of the computer, so our perceptions usefully hide the complexity of the world and guide adaptive behavior. So, our senses and even our attentional capacity sort of filter out the world, everything in the world, and just give us this representation that's most salient and useful. So the idea here is that if evolution were to, evolution selects on these sort of representations rather than on things that are direct perception based. And so this was meant to guide research in object categorization, and he actually comes up with a new class of evolutionary games called interface games, in which pithy perceptions often drive true perceptions to extinction. So the idea is that in natural selection, when you're, and he's modeled this as a game, pithy perceptions are maybe things that are maybe not real, in the sense that they're true representations of direct perception, or actually outcompete or have a higher fitness than true perceptions for various reasons. And maybe those suit the organism better, and or maybe it's it filters out a lot of noise, or maybe it's just more aesthetically pleasing for if you evolve this aesthetic sense, it's just something that maybe helps the organism do better in the world. The idea is that it's some representation that isn't based on direct perception, but there's this, you have to basically deal with this information in some way, and so these interfaces are the way to do this. So there's a shorter Quanta article on it. So this kind of goes through this at a more friendly level in terms of laying out the details, but it's also sometimes they get a little bit they hype it a little bit more than you would like. So but this is actually, they're asking them some questions here. So, while neuroscientists struggle to understand how there can be such a thing as first-person reality, quantum physicists had to grapple with the mystery of how there can be anything but a first-person reality. In short, all roads lead back to the observer. And that's where you can find Hoffman straddling the boundaries, attempting a mathematical model of the observer, trying to get at the reality behind the illusion. And so they ask him some questions here. One is, people often use Darwinian evolution as an argument that our perceptions accurately reflect reality. And so, if I think I'm seeing a palm tree, but it's really a tiger, I'm in trouble. And so, Hoffman says, right, the classic argument is that those of our ancestors who saw more accurately had a competitive advantage over those who saw less accurately, and they were more likely to pass on their genes that coded for more accurate perceptions, and so on. This sounds very plausible, but I think it is utterly false. It misunderstands the fundamental fact about evolution, which is that it's about fitness functions, mathematical functions that describe how well a given strategy achieves the goals of survival and reproduction. The mathematical physicist Chetan Prakash proved a theorem that I devised that says, according to evolution by natural selection, an organism that sees reality as it is will never be more fit than an organism of equal complexity that sees none of reality, but is just tuned to fitness. And so that's his point of view on that. So I think that's an interesting, that's interface theory. And then we talked about it in terms of contrasting it with evolutionary psychology. And so that's, again, we can keep going on that over the next couple weeks, and maybe we can incorporate some of that into the Trajectories work. There's this thing, reward is enough. So this is let's see if this comes up. Okay, so this is Carlos Perez. He's sort of a machine learning person on Twitter, and so this is the paper, and this is his opinion. Okay, the reward is enough paper offers a piss poor explanation as to how AGI is achieved. That's pretty opinionated. I'm actually more surprised that that DeepMind wrote such a poorly constructed philosophical paper. So DeepMind is essentially people at DeepMind. It was, and then he's this Ken Stanley, who is a person who does a lot of stuff with AI and artificial life. Actually has a much better construction, which he presents the paper. So there's this article here. I don't know if I have it in here, but this is an ACM paper on it. And Carlos continues on, the major flaw of the reward is enough paper is that the authors don't know how to disentangle the self-referential nature of the problem. So it's written in a way that sounds like a bunch of poorly hidden tautological statements. Okay, so I don't know. Let's see. This is the paper, I believe. So this is reward is enough. This was an artificial intelligence. It's a brand new paper. It's David Silver and Rick Sutton is on it. So he's the sort of the godfather of reinforcement learning, as we've talked about.
Yeah,
and,
he's the better lesson guy.
Yeah. So the abstract is, in this article we hypothesize that intelligence and its associated abilities can be understood as subserving the maximization of reward. Accordingly, reward is enough to drive behavior that exhibits abilities studied in natural and artificial intelligence, including knowledge, learning, perception, social intelligence, language, generalization, and imitation. This is in contrast to the view that specialized problem formations are needed for each ability based on other signals or objectives. Furthermore, we suggest that agents that learn through trial and error experienced to maximize reward could learn behavior that exhibits most, if not all, of these abilities. And therefore, the powerful reinforcement learning agents could constitute a solution to artificial general intelligence. Okay, yeah, this reminds me kind of like when people said attention is all you need. So there's a lot of that sort of arrogance going on in this field, which is, enough right there. That's something for a trajectory. Like, there's this meta theme, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think this would be. We should try to incorporate this specifically one, actually.
Yeah. So, I mean, in contrast to the last set of papers we looked at with interface theory. Interface theory, they're talking about natural selection. They're talking about selection and fitness. And they're talking about fitness functions. And they're saying that, well, look, if you're perceiving the world as it is, theoretically that should be, the fittest thing. But that's actually not true. We find that if you build a representation that's maybe false in some ways, or, if you think about narratives or storytelling, a lot of times, humans will tell stories, and the stories will not necessarily be totally accurate, but they convey certain ideas, and that's the point of the stories, and that's taking the world and putting it into this representation. And then that's fitter, actually, in some ways, than something where it's a direct perception. But in both cases there, you're talking about a fitness function which operates across generations. In this paper, we're talking about rewards. So the rewards are much more immediate, and they're within an organism instead of across generations. And so in this case, we're saying, well, reward is enough to drive behavior. But, it's interesting to think about the two different levels there of what people are talking about. Is it that reward is driving sort of this optimization, or, and driving fitness, which in the case of fitness function, for multi-generational evolution, we would assume that there would be agents that maybe wouldn't maximize their fitness, or have a way to maximize their fitness that isn't obvious. And so reward may not get you to that point where you're getting these non-obvious fitness advantages, or better yet, you have a bunch of agents that are doing different strategies, and that some of them are maybe in one niche, they're very fit in another niche, maybe they're not as fit. And so it's interesting to think about that with respect to reward. And I haven't read the whole paper. I'm not going to do a deep interrogation of this paper, but I just leave this to the reader, to think about how these two things relate to one another. So here, you see an example here in this figure. The reward is enough hypothesis looks like this. You have this observation, you have this reward, and you have this action. So you have an action, you have an observation, and it gets rewarded. And that maximizes your payoff. Your payoff gets maximized as so the squirrel runs up to this tree, it finds nuts, it eats nuts, and then it caches nuts. And all this is rewarded at the various stages of behavior. So you build this behavior from this exploratory behavior to this, discovery behavior, and learning that it's safe to eat nuts and that they're good, and then optimizing that behavior with caching. And then you have the same thing with this robot. The idea is that's the same process. And then you have this set of different things going on, and these are different behaviors or different elements of cognition. So you have memory, perception, planning, motor control. I don't know what these two circles are here. Okay. Oh, I guess it's agent stream of experiences mapped onto a set of abilities expressed within that experience. So I guess there's one, and then there's the other, and then the overlap. And that's where you find the optimal point. So reward will give you, will optimize for these different types of cognitive functions. So yeah, I think this is a good paper to read over. We should definitely put it in the Trajectories thing. And I think, this idea of having these different hypotheses that people will say, well, this is the way to go. This is the way to see the world. I think this paper definitely fits into that. So, there's some questions, though, that we need to be aware of for this. If you have, say, rich reward signal, which environment, what else other than reward maximization could be enough for intelligence? So that's where they talk about unsupervised learning. They talk about evolution by natural selection here. So evolution by natural selection can be understood at an abstract level as maximizing fitness as measured by individual reproductive fitness optimized by a population-based mechanism such as mutation or crossover. So I don't know how they... And then they talk about maximization of free energy, and optimization is a general framework. So they don't really address those issues here, but they do talk about it in a certain way. And so there's that. Which reward maximization problem? Can offline learning from a sufficiently large data set be enough for intelligence? Is the reward signal too impoverished? So they basically hit a bunch of caveats here and kind of give you, maybe some consideration. They don't really address them directly, but they kind of give you, like, what are the things we need to think about? So, this is a good paper to read over. I don't know if you agree with it or not, but obviously some people didn't. So, I think this is, so, let's see. Here's that paper. Let's see. Oh, I didn't want to mention this, actually. There was this kind of odd tweet. I don't know if it was odd, but this paper that someone wrote about, like, they surveyed a bunch of people at a consciousness workshop, and they asked them about basically what entities they think have consciousness. So, obviously yourself. Are you conscious? And astoundingly, it wasn't, like, universal. But, yeah, I think everyone thought they had consciousness. They just weren't sure, like, what level. Yeah. Other people... And then we get into the more interesting examples. You have monkey, dog, octopus, baby, bat, baby. I don't know why baby would be less, but bat, fish, worm, amoeba. And then this says here, I like how thermostats end up even below rocks. Eat that, cyberneticists. So what that refers to is that cyberneticists think of thermostats as the hallmark model system for cybernetic regulation. And so is this a form of, consciousness, or, is it less conscious than a rock? And, what is the, how does that fit into the whole framework? So this is the chart. So as you can see, a thermostat is a little less conscious than a rock, according to these researchers, as surveyed. And trees are a little bit more conscious than rocks or thermostats. And so this is the paper. This is the academic survey on theoretical foundations, common assumptions in the current state of the field of consciousness science. So this is a part of, CogSci that is, it's consciousness. It's a little bit different than the rest of CogSci in that a lot of it is speculative. There's a lot of, theory, and there's a lot of data, but it's like, people really do disagree on, especially since they're surveying people that are attending this conference, the annual meeting. So it's, people are going to have different opinions about things. It's really interesting to, survey a group like that because they'll have, like, different opinions. Interestingly enough, they have these questions they asked them, and then they gave these answers, and that was the chart that I showed you. So that might be something to go through and think about how, like, if they survey a subfield of cognitive science, like, how do you, so this is a good example here. This is a figure that shows, like, some of the key areas in the field. Do you believe X? Okay, so this is one higher order. Do you believe that consciousness perception requires having a higher order state about the first order representation? And so this is definitely yes, probably yes, neutral, probably not, definitely not. So it's like evenly distributed here almost. Phenomenal. Do you think that there's phenomenal content, meaning like stuff in the world beyond that which we have cognitive access to? In other words, maybe like the supernatural or something. And this was a little bit more yes than no, which is interesting because, on the one hand, that's sort of magical thinking. On the other hand, it's like, okay, we're seeing that there are things that we can't access with our senses. And so, or representations even. So that's an interesting finding. And I don't know what it implies, but, this sort of thing, it kind of gives you maybe a Rosetta Stone to the literature. Given the laws of physics as they are, do you think philosophical zombies are possible? So this is, there's a whole field on this philosophical zombies, and I'm not going to get into that. I don't really even remember what it is, but a fair number of people do not believe this, although it's a very popular thing in the literature to talk about. So that's an interesting thing. Has consciousness been selected for during evolution because it fulfilled an adaptive function? And here you have a large majority of people saying probably or certainly. So that's interesting. And then could there ever be a complete biophysical explanation of consciousness? Again, a fair majority of people said yes. So that's interesting in terms of the state of the field. Interestingly enough, we can map this to sort of the literature and see, how this plays out. So then they have theories, and so this isn't necessarily, this is if we take like papers in the literature. There are theories in the literature with literature around it, like predictive processing. And you can go here to this survey and say, look, here are people in the field of consciousness. What do they think about these different theories? Never mind like the strength of the arguments, but just like, what do you think about the theories? And this is like, so what theoretical positions do you find most promising with respect to consciousness? Predictive processing comes out on top. There are things like global workspace theory, and then there are like, quantum theories are actually at the bottom. Multiple drafts. So there are all these theories that exist, these candidates, and this is the ranking that the practitioners put them in. So without any more detail than just this answering this question, this is how they kind of rank. That's interesting. I don't know what that means, but so that's that. And then I think that's all we'll talk about in this paper. But it's definitely something we should revisit for the trajectories work. Okay, so I did want to go through, I think, one more paper here. We talked about this paper, I can't remember. Oh, Jesse, you're not muted. I don't know if, yeah. It feels like we did, but I don't know. Anyways, this is a paper on free energy, the free energy principle, and active inference in consciousness. So this is apparently one of the leading candidates for consciousness. And this is radically embodied conscious cybernetic Bayesian brain. It's a mouthful. Towards explaining the emergence of agency. So, an activists have criticized traditional cognitive sciences hamstrung by naive Cartesian assumptions, wherein minds are considered apart from their context of environmentally embedded bodies. So this is where you have this brain-body dualism. Indeed, the starting place for understanding minds must be in terms of their evolution and development as control systems for niche constructing organisms. So there's that term again, niche construction, and there's a formal theory of niche construction, but I find it interesting that so many people are focusing on niches of the environment rather than just the environment itself. So this is like where you have a specific instance of the environment, and that there's a niche that's being constructed by the organism. So it's this constructivist view where you're building a place in the general environment to sort of optimize your behavior. So here I draw from both an activist and cognitivist perspectives on mind, proposing an adequate characterization of teleological phenomena, which are these phenomena that unfold in time, may require a reappraisal of mental homunculi as embodied self-models, understood as body maps with agentic properties. So homunculi are these little representations of our bodies. And like there's something called a homunculus in the motor cortex, which is a mapping of our bodies to sort of a sensory representation. So we have, we have nerve endings in our different parts of our body, and they have different densities. So our hands have more nerve endings than our trunk, I guess, and so that's represented in this representation in the motor cortex. It's like they're taking in information from these different places in the body and representing it in terms of its density of receptors. And then, this is what they call the homunculus. You'll see this little figure, this little human that's distorted, and that's what that's supposed to mean, that there's a distortion of like the hands and the head and the lips, because there are more sensory inputs there, and those all map to somewhere in the brain where there's a representation. And so this is a body map he's talking about. This body map functions as a predictive memory system and as a cybernetic controller. So this may be a major organizing principle for neural architectures. Embodied experiences may provide foundational lessons and learning curriculums in which agents explore increasingly challenging inference spaces along zones of proximal development. Drawing on models from neurophysiology, psychology, and developmental robotics, I suggest a potentially surprising answer to how this problem might be solved. And that is, body maps may be the primary source of empirical priors and reliably learnable posterior expectations. If these maps play this kind of foundational role in bootstrapping cognitive development, then we ought to expect bidirectional linkages between all sensory modalities and frontal-parietal control hierarchies. So infusing all senses with the somatic motor property, therefore structuring all perception by relevant affordances, this solves the framing problem for embodied agents. So then he adds in the free energy principle and active inference framework on top of this to find a mechanism for intentional action selection. So this is this radically embodied developmental legacy. It suggests these imaginings may be intentionally shaped by partially expressed motor acts and mental simulations. And this provides a means of agentic control for all these different parts of cognition. So this manuscript is an attempt to show how radically embodied cybernetic Bayesian brain may create foundations for intelligence, consciousness, and then self-world models as well, and free will. So there's a lot in this paper. So this ESM is embodied self model. And so this is what they're operating on, this model. And I think they draw a lot from development. It's just, there's a lot of stuff in this paper. And I don't know if there are any figures in it, but I think it's, if we can cut through a little bit of the jargon, maybe we can get some insight for what we're talking about with respect to development and some of the more cognitive aspects of it. Yeah. So, yeah. And he's actually talking about policy selection here. So there's a flavoring of reinforcement learning as well. So, yeah. It's great. Okay, this is interesting. The generation of particular imagings may occur on timescales of approximately 200 to 300 milliseconds. So he's talking about timing, and interesting. A lot of theories of artificial intelligence don't talk too much about timing, especially in the brain. But that's actually a very critical thing to talk about timing. And, this is largely something you see in EEG, where they talk about the timing of event potentials and things like that. But it's interesting, that there are these time scales in the brain that are, maybe 100 or 300 or 400 milliseconds long. And then you have these larger time scales of which we're talking about, where we talk about, like, reward shaping behavior or the natural selection of behavior. So these are vastly different time scales, and so I think it's integral to think about that in this way. That what time scales are we talking about? What theories are we talking about? And what makes sense to bridge those time scales? So I think that's enough for this paper. Again, we can. I'll just put a link to the folder, and I'll put this up on the Slack because a lot of you couldn't make it today. So. that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to head out pretty much now. But
Alright.
this is all really good stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks for attending, and let's keep in touch on Slack this week. And if you want to create that Discord, that'd be great too. And we'll be in touch on the planning for this event coming up.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks everybody who's in the lab doing stuff and out at the meetings.
Yeah.
But I'll